The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. As a reminder, members participating in a hearing remotely should be visible on camera throughout the hearing. The witnesses who are not used to this, we will have one witness coming in remotely, and members will be here physically and appear on screen. Don't worry too much about that. There will be a good crowd here through the course of the hearing, and we'll just hope that it all goes well technologically. As with in-person hearings, members and witnesses are responsible for controlling their own microphones. Those joining remotely should keep themselves muted unless recognized by the chair and should expeditiously unmute themselves when recognized. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. Committee staff is sitting right there on the table next to the witnesses. With that done, good morning and thank you all for joining in this really important hybrid hearing. The hearing is entitled Big Ideas for Small Business, Fostering American Entrepreneurship Through Starting, Sustaining, and Growing Small Businesses. We welcome our witnesses, who hopefully will guide the committee on what the government and what others might do to assist in those people throughout the country who decide to live the American dream by founding their own business, large or small. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. In today's hearing, we'll examine the role that entrepreneurship and small business play in creating pathways to economic security and to growth. It is at the very core of the concept of the American dream. In my own experience, and I think my colleagues share this experience, there's just not a neighborhood in America that doesn't have some entrepreneurially inclined person who identifies a need in that neighborhood and starts a business to fill that need. It might be a painting service in the city of Bridgeport, or back when I used to do some work in the Bronx, it may be a coco helado business in the Bronx on a hot day that actually provides a person or a family with income and sustenance. It is also true, obviously, that it is extraordinarily difficult to start a business and to succeed. The market economy can be unforgiving. And of course, at least in my own anecdotal experience, entrepreneurs who've identified a need often have extreme difficulty in finding the capital to actually start the business and grow that business once successfully. So I hope we'll spend some time today examining the different ways in which small businesses can be assisted in what I think is the single biggest challenge that they have. That, of course, is not the only challenge. Business is hard, the market is unforgiving, and of course, it is often our smallest of small businesses that have the least access to the information and the technical assistance that they may need to grow. In some jurisdictions, I know in my own cities in southwestern Connecticut, there are also regulatory barriers to, for example, that individual who wants to be a hairdresser, and I'm sure we'll examine that today as well. So the question really is, how can we get this institution, these entrepreneurs who are at the very core of the concept of the American dream, to succeed more often than they do today? The harsh reality, of course, is that most new businesses that start up do not succeed. But I am quite certain from my own anecdotal experience, particularly in disadvantaged communities, that an awful lot of businesses, given just a little easier access to capital, a little bit more technical assistance, might really grow into wonderful businesses that serve their community and provide those entrepreneurs who start those businesses with a foothold in the American middle class and the ability to live the American dream. I very much look forward to the testimony of our witnesses today, and with that, we'll yield back the time and recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to our conversation today about how we can help families and workers in small businesses across our country. When I talk to folks across the country and in Wisconsin, they tell me their number one issue is we need to get inflation under control. Just last week, we saw inflation hit 7.9%, the highest in 40 years. And when prices are surging and wages aren't keeping up, your paycheck is worth less and everything starts to cost more. These workers and families are being clobbered by inflation. I think the basic answer is to get spending under control, get the government out of the way, and get our way of life back. Doing so will drive up real wages, limit inflation, and get Americans back to family-sustaining jobs. In short, it'll help American workers thrive. Nearly 2/3 of all new jobs come from a small business in this country. Small businesses provide great opportunities for work, but jobs can't be created without certain conditions. So I think what we could do today is really dive into some of the challenges people face when they're opening a small business. You referenced somebody who's cutting hair. I think of a woman trying to start a business in maybe Racine, Wisconsin, maybe starting a hair salon. She'll need a few things to get started: an official license, capital, workers, and a location. In Wisconsin, like many states, she'd need to get a hairdresser's license. In the state of Wisconsin, that's 1,550 hours that are needed in training to be able to apply for a license. That's over 9 months at 40 hours a week of training. And after she jumps through all the government hoops and takes the test, she'll need to apply for a license before she can fully open. I hope that we can talk today and examine some of those barriers to entry that might prevent someone like her from working a family-sustaining job or starting a small business. Regular inflation is also making things harder. Inflation's driving up how much she may need to borrow. When we look at locations where she could set up a shop, the rent on her lease is becoming more expensive, and possibly more so than she can afford as inflation continues to rise. Or in the case of a restaurant owner, one of whom we'll speak with today, I think inflation is causing all sorts of headaches to our restaurant entrepreneurs. The price of food is up 7.9%, driving up input costs. Meat, fish, eggs specifically are up 13%, a huge cost for a lot of our restaurant entrepreneurs, a lot of restaurant small businesses. Electricity is up 9%. All these price hikes are affecting the bottom line of small businesses and their ability to operate, and most importantly, their ability to pay their employees after addressing inflation. It should be Congress's #1 to-do list. I can't really stress how important it is that I think we get inflation here under control. We need to stop making the government an obstacle to growth, though, as well. Excessive regulatory burdens across the country are keeping people from starting new businesses. And if the government makes it harder to do business, a lot of good hairdressers aren't going to be cutting hair. Restaurant owners are going to be struggling to keep the lights on. We need to bring back certainty to the economy to help our workers. We need to give workers their purchasing power back by reining in out-of-control inflation. And this means reducing government's out-of-control spending. It means bringing inflation down to take the stress off hardworking families. And we can take these steps and get Washington out of the way, we can get our way of life back. Today, I look forward to discussing ways we can get people working, family-sustaining jobs through small businesses. I look forward to today's discussion. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
I thank the ranking member. And before we turn to our witnesses, I ask for unanimous consent to play a very brief video from everyday Americans. It's been this committee's practice to do everything we can to actually hear the voices of Americans who are living some of the challenges that this committee is here to address and to get out of Washington and into the real world. So I ask for unanimous consent to play a video from everyday Americans sharing their experiences as part of the committee's mission to show America to itself. So ordered. Thank you. Please play that video.
I founded the Innovative Daycare Corp 4 years ago, motivated by a goal to expand opportunities for very young children. It's actually very, very sad that people's dreams are being shattered because they can't have access to capital or access to any sort of resources. I definitely think that there needs to be a different strategy when it comes to marketing government resources. Small businesses are the backbone of the economy. The resources available are just not accessible to everyone, especially Black and brown people and women. I have stayed on a very little salary to be able to open this location. Many of the children that I serve do look like me. So I know firsthand the importance of inclusivity and diversity. Many times our stories are missing, and our children deserve to see themselves in their heroes and in their role models. When representation is at the core of your business philosophy, as it is with mine, you are encouraging children to want to be astronauts, doctors, lawyers, teachers, even advocates such as myself. But you can get there. I do believe that I am living the American dream.
I think, like most people, inflation is making it more difficult to make purchases. That's just in general, and I guess it kind of goes without saying. But from a broader perspective, contractors and vendors, they are very nervous. They become very nervous, or they're unable to, or unwilling to in a lot, or well, I say unwilling to, but unable to in a lot of cases, to lock in their prices when there's a lot of inflation, particularly as it changes on a regular basis. And when there's uncertainty there, the money dries up, or owners, banks, and so forth, developers, they sit back and say, well, we're gonna wait and see what the climate is and what this administration is going to do, what they're not going to do before we invest all this money in this project. Anything that helps to support stability and confidence in the market is a help, and anything that helps to lower our taxes is certainly a help.
My name is Pamela Cager, owner and operator of FAO Cakes and Catering.
My name is Montanique Cager. I handle the paperwork.
He's front of the house. People come in and they'll, before they even get out the door, they'll start, to eating on a cake and,
eat it all.
Yeah, or eat it all before they even get out the door. There is no other feeling like that. You might run into discrimination. It's very frustrating to see that in this day and
I'm not saying you have to do the work for us. We'll do the work.
right.
Lord knows, we've been in the bakery till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We don't mind working. The government has some programs, but not everybody knows about them.
We need access to opportunity, access to funding, as well as access to knowledge and access to support.
This is my wife's gift. She's been doing this for a while. So we're not going to just stop. That's what our relationship is about, making her dreams come true. And it helps the whole family. So you can't beat that kind of scenario.
Okay, thank you again. Now, we welcome the testimony of our distinguished witnesses. First, we have Ms. Lawana Russell, owner of Business Management Associates and chair of the board at the Small Business Majority. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Brett Theodos, Senior Fellow and Director of the Community Economic Development Hub at the Urban Institute. Next, we have Mr. Everett K. Sands, who is CEO and President of Lendistry. And then we will have remotely Mr. John Rogers, co-CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Ariel Investments and Chairman of the SBA Council on Underserved Communities. And lastly, we have Ms. Dina Rubio, who is the owner-operator of a restaurant by the name of Don Ramon. Witnesses are reminded that their oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. You should be able to see a timer directly in front of you that will indicate how much time you have left. For those joining remotely, the timer will appear as a participant on your screen. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will appear. I ask that you be mindful of the timer, and when the red light appears, to quickly wrap up your testimony so that we can respect the time of the other witnesses and the committee members. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. Ms. Russell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give a summary of your testimony. Ma'am, pull that mic just a little closer. Yeah, and make sure it's on. We're having a little. Is it on? Mauricio, can you please assist? Maybe the mic's not working. Ms. Russell, we're not charging your 5 minutes here, don't worry.
Testing.
There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Russell, you are recognized for your full 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman Himes and members of the committee. My name is Luana Russell. I'm the founder and president of Business Management Associates. We're a business process and human capital management firm. I'm also the chair of the board of the Small Business Majority, a national small business organization empowering America's entrepreneurs. I am so pleased to join you today to comment on the critical role of entrepreneurship as a pathway to long-term financial stability and growth for Americans. But I'm also one that understands the barriers that exist to starting and sustaining a business. I am really proud to be the founder of one of those 32.5 million small businesses in the United States. Collectively, we employ 61.2 people, nearly half of all American employees. Our impact on the economy is vital to the success of our country. As a small business owner and a woman of color, I can tell you that not a day goes by without me remembering the struggles and barriers I faced when launching my business. Growing up, I was often told that I wasn't smart enough or good enough. This is the kind of inherent bias and lack of awareness that could hold people down and hold them back, but inspired me to go for more, to be more. And entrepreneurship allowed me to do just that. I went from being what I call a gigpreneur, always having a gig on the side, and then I completely started a company from scratch with just $500. My experiences brought me into new audiences and into several challenges, especially as they related to the lack of financial education I received in school. I realized that this is something sorely missing in our nation. Financial literacy, whether you aspire to be an entrepreneur or not, is vital to the success of any American, and I believe that all high schools should implement financial programs. How do you build credit? How do you file for taxes or even save for the future? Understanding that credit card game are key basics to financial literacy. In the beginning, I recall going to a large bank, and I already had a mortgage there and a couple of savings accounts. I wanted to get a small $25,000 loan. They turned me down. Then I had a conversation with a technical assistance advisor who suggested I look at developing a relationship with a small community bank. That first relationship taught me so much about how I should approach small business financing. I realized that community banks are key to the small business ecosystem. They provide critical funding to entrepreneurs and offer more guidance and support in ways larger banks do not. Think about the stories you've heard surrounding the Paycheck Protection Program during the first rounds of funding. Very few small businesses who had established relationships at a bank were able to capitalize on that program, lack of those relationships. Access to traditional financing is also critical because too many businesses, especially those owned by women, people of color, and immigrants, are being targeted by predatory lenders. The lack of regulations in small business lending at the national level has allowed some lenders to target and take advantage of business owners who may be in desperate need of quick financing to keep their businesses afloat. As we forge ahead on what continues to be the main barriers of entrepreneurship, I encourage elected officials to consider the following solutions to help level the playing field. First, increase funding for technical assistance providers. Entrepreneurs across America can benefit from free and low-cost business assistance to help manage and pivot their businesses in times of crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that the Small Business Administration and its different assistance providers require more funding and resources to better assist the growing influx of entrepreneurs. Next, support and fund more community banks across the country. These banks are the center of smaller communities and have a better understanding of the unique challenges of businesses in their specific ecosystems, especially those who are underserved and in rural areas. For instance, my bank caters to federal contractors. Other banks may cater to retail establishments because that's what that community is made up of. Third, implement policies at the national and state level to increase child care affordability. This should include the expansion and improvement of federal income tax credits for child care expenses, which would allow working parents to receive a percentage of child care expenses back as a tax refund. And finally, revisit licensing standards and requirements for small businesses. Although this is a little more nuanced because this is state by state, much of the entity establishment in each state is so burdensome. My business operates in 11 different states, which means I need to become familiar with each state's regulations and processes. My annual tax return can be up to 200 pages. As you can imagine, this takes a lot of time away from maintaining and expanding my operations, and quite frankly, it can be a little expensive. It would be meaningful to implement universal procedures where it makes sense, which would support small business expansion and growth. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on these critical issues today for the small business community, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Dr. Theodos, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to speak with you today. Views expressed are my own. Small businesses are an anchor of the U.S. economy. Businesses with fewer than 20 employees make up 89% of businesses. These enterprises have immense influence in generating economic growth, producing social capital, and building communities. Despite their economic, social, and cultural value, small businesses are among the most challenging enterprises not only to start, but also scale and grow. Access to capital is not shared equally across places and groups. Our research shows that rural areas have lower lending. Decades of segregation and barriers have held back some entrepreneurs of color and lower income neighborhoods from economic growth. And equity finance is even less equitably distributed than debt capital. For example, in 2020, only 2% of venture capital funding went to women-owned firms, and only 2% went to Black and Latino-owned businesses combined. Just 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts, receive 75% of all VC investment. The federal government has programs to address these issues, but I submit that the ongoing permanent suite of federal small business supports is threadbare. While, for example, there are an array of subsidies for affordable housing, and needed, the federal government does too little to address inequities and to support growth for small businesses. As a result, our economy is smaller, less dynamic, and less robust. What can we do? First priority, we need to expand access to capital for underserved small businesses. I recommend the creation of duty-to-serve equivalent targets for the SBA in terms of loans that go to startups, rural, women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. SBA 7A and 504 loan programs need to become more flexible, for example, by allowing revenue-based financing, royalty debt, and subordinated debt. The SBA should bolster the Community Advantage program. The SBA microloan program should be scaled significantly and also made more flexible. Treasury's SSBCI should be closely watched, and if it meets its goals, be made permanent. In terms of equity capital, we need to expand the EDA's Build to Scale program, retool the SBA's SBIC program, and reform opportunity zones to serve small businesses, not real estate. CDFIs, community development credit unions, minority depository institutions, and community banks play important roles in serving small businesses. However, mission lenders are not present in all communities. To help, the federal government should pilot a first loss reserve pool for CDFI small business lending. Like for healthy food finance, we also need a new Treasury CDFI fund program that provides equity grants to small business CDFI loan funds in a way that ties these awards to new loan production growth. We also need a new pilot program building from a promising model in Chicago that pairs CDFI debt with grants for business owners who need more support. We should incentivize banks to buy CDFI loans to recapitalize CDFIs. And cooperatively owned businesses, which have a long history of success, need our help to level their playing field in accessing federal programs and supports. Second priority, we need to enhance the provision of technical assistance. Although supports are available to small businesses across the country, we need to raise their visibility because awareness is lacking. Rather than 101 trainings, we need to invest in high-quality, advanced online training and one-on-one coaching. We need more support for sectoral or place-based business incubators. We also need research on what assistance, coaching, mentoring, training, incubator, and accelerator programs have the most positive outcomes. Third priority, we need sensible regulatory oversight. This includes regulation that curbs monopolistic power and market concentration and gives small businesses a level playing field. Occupational licensing reform will be needed to lower barriers to entry. The Community Reinvestment Act should be strengthened and expanded to non-bank financial institutions. An additional study is needed how to strengthen small business set-aside requirements. Last priority, we need to collect and publish better data on small business lending and investments. Relative to lending for home purchase or apartment construction, we have much weaker insights into small business loans. We need timely collection and publication of small business lending data under Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act. We need expanded and more timely data collection on small businesses through the Census Bureau. And several federal small business programs have shortcomings in data collection and publication that need fixing. I appreciate your consideration of this testimony and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Theodos. Mr. Sands, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Himes, Ranking Member Steele, and distinguished members of the Select Committee. Thank you for calling this hearing on fostering entrepreneurship by developing small businesses. I appreciate the opportunity to share perspectives and linkages among 4 propositions. They are: 1, the value of entrepreneurship; 2, the importance of supporting capital access along with technical assistance for underserved and underbanked communities; 3, the critical role community development financial institutions play in the capital access ecosystem; and 4th, the urgent need for Congress to take a series of smart actions at little or no cost that will multiply the positive impact for small businesses from tools Congress already has created and funded. My name is Everett Sands, and I'm dedicated to fellow entrepreneurs and small businesses and to economic opportunity for those who historically have been underbanked and unbanked. I have more than 20 years of experience in lending, including at a minority-to-deposit institution, one of the largest national banks, and the only fintech CDFI lendistry. For the past 6 years as founder and CEO, my focus has been on providing capital on responsible terms to underserved businesses. In addition to being a CDFI, Lendistry is a community development entity, a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and a signatory to the Small Business Borrowers Bill of Rights. We're one of the nation's top SBA lenders in the $50,000 to $250,000 size range, and more than 70% of our loans go to underserved borrowers. We have a nonprofit small business advisory and technical assistance affiliate. Lendistry has been able to make an impact and support our origination and technical assistance at scale due to our focus on small and underserved businesses, our partnerships with local and specialized organizations, and our embrace of technology and online tools. Over the past 23 months, Lendistry has deployed approximately $8.4 billion to 570,000 rural and urban small businesses in 50 states, 94% of which employ fewer than 10 employees, and we expect that figure to grow. I will very quickly connect the value of entrepreneurship, the importance of supporting capital access, and a critical role CDFIs play in the ecosystem. Entrepreneurship has long been the most effective means for narrowing the racial wealth gap and represents another path for narrowing the gender pay gap, both for women founders and employees. Entrepreneurship is also the key source of job growth. Businesses that are less than 5 years old create nearly all net new jobs in the American economy. Here's the thing. Trends in entrepreneurship show that you can't support entrepreneurship without supporting capital access to underserved and underbanked communities, because it is these very communities that are producing entrepreneurs at a higher rate than any others, and it's because these very communities are the least well-served by traditional lending institutions. Right now, there are more fledgling new businesses in this country than ever before. In the past 2 years, a record nearly 10 million new businesses were launched, for an average annual rate of new business formation that is more than 50% greater than it was in 2010 to 2019. Moreover, Black and brown people, as well as women in general, are starting new businesses at a greater rate than non-minority men, which means the composition of the nearly 10 million new founders is more diverse than ever. The 2 most consequential times in the life cycle of a small business is in its nascency and when it outgrows its initial source of financing. At both stages, capital access is the key factor to success, and at both stages, traditional lending institutions are not well suited to meet the needs of most entrepreneurs. Let's look at PPP lending. In May of 2021, CDFI's average loan size was $21,653 compared to $41,560 across all lender classes. And nearly 40% of their loans were reached to businesses in low to moderate income communities. In 2019, nearly 75% of CDFI lending was to underserved populations in distressed areas. There isn't time for me to discuss the 11 specific no or low cost, high return recommendations spelled out in my written testimony. Instead, I will leave you with 3 higher order messages that inform and shape those recommendations. First, any effective federal strategy for supporting capital access for small businesses must not be dependent on large banks. It's operationally inefficient for large banks to put capital to work for making very high number of small-sized business loans. Second, Congress should focus on specific actions to clear away bottlenecks that prevent CDFIs from making greater use of powerful tools Congress has already created. My written testimony provides 6 recommendations for accomplishing this, including licensing exemptions for CDFIs. And finally, Congress should support SBA in evolving with the needs of small business and leveraging lessons taught through the crucible of the PPP experience. My written testimony contains 3 specific recommendations for accomplishing this. I thank the Select Committee and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sands. Mr. Rogers, who I understand is coming in remotely, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Himes, Ranking Member Steele, and members of the Select Committee, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak. I'd also like to thank the staff for their thoughtful work. My name is John Rogers. I am chairman of Chicago-based Ariel Investments, founded in 1983. We were the first African-American owned asset management firm in the country. I'm also honored to serve as the chairman of the SBA's Council on Underserved Communities, having been appointed to that role by Administrator Isabella Guzman. I'm appearing today in my individual capacity. I am pleased to talk about some of the challenges facing small and diverse-owned businesses and offer some solutions to increased opportunity. I'm the product of 2 pioneering parents. My father was an original Tuskegee Airman, and my mother was the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Chicago Law School in 1946. Entrepreneurship is truly dear to me. My great-grandfather, J.B. Stratford, owned the Stratford Hotel, the largest Black-owned hotel in the nation, before it was destroyed in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Since then, despite modest progress, the current economic prospects for Black entrepreneurs have stalled or even gone backwards. The existing wealth gap in America between Blacks and whites is well known, but few realize the gap has widened since segregation was legally outlawed. Research by Dean Kerwin Charles at the Yale School of Management found that while the wealth gap did shrink between 1940 and 1970, it is now wider than it was in 1950. Similarly, according to Crane Chicago Business, 0 of the top 100 privately held companies in Chicago are Black-owned, as compared to over 20 years ago when there were 3. I offer 3 thoughts on why barriers persist for Black businesses. First, due to the ramifications of historical segregation, there's a tendency to work with people you know and with whom you are comfortable. Second, many corporations and nonprofits have embraced well-intentioned supplier diversity programs emphasizing construction and other commodity-related fields with low profit margins. However, this approach excludes us from parts of the economy where wealth, power, and jobs are created today, such as professional services, financial services, media, and technology. I would go as far as calling it a modern-day Jim Crow and a reflection of implicit or unconscious bias. Finally, as we get further away from the height of the civil rights movement, many Americans with short memories are convinced that the economic playing field is fair. I'd like to highlight 3 models that I think are yielding results today. McDonald's has been a leader in creating multi-generational wealth through its commitment to working with diverse-owned suppliers and franchisees going back to 1968. According to Black Enterprise, 5 of the 20 largest Black-owned businesses in the nation started out as McDonald's suppliers. The University of Chicago created an Office of Business Diversity over a decade ago and now spends more than $166 million with over 100 minority-owned businesses. Its annual symposium connects minority professional services companies with university leadership. Similarly, Exelon Corporation has led the way through transparency and tracking its spending across all categories. Moreover, it also encourages diversity among non-minority owned companies by requiring them to report on the diversity of their senior management teams and providing incentives for improvement. Looking to the future, I strongly recommend following the University of Chicago and other organizations such as the Civic Committee of Chicago and CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion by replacing the outdated term supplier diversity with the more expansive, modern term business diversity. Furthermore, anchor institutions must understand that entrepreneurs not only need access to capital, but we also need access to customers. In a world of trillion-dollar companies, small businesses face greater challenges than ever. We should consider whether the definition of small business should be adjusted consistent with how the U.S. economy has evolved. And we should shine a light and spotlight the SBA's new and innovative tools and resources. At the federal level, Congress can advance legislation that will require large federal contractors to provide transparency in annual spending within the high profit margin, high growth sectors of the economy that are often overlooked by institutions focused on traditional procurement. As Reverend Jackson often notes, baseball became a better sport when Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, and our own Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks, were allowed to play. We all know, and the data show, the U.S. will be a stronger country when our diverse talent is on the playing field, contributing their intellect and creativity, and fully engaged in our capitalist democracy. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Rubio, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Himes and Ranking Member Brian Steele, and members of the committee for allowing me to testify about the importance of fostering American entrepreneurship through starting, sustaining, and growing small businesses. My name is Dina Rubio, and I'm the owner of Don Ramon Restaurant in West Palm Beach, Florida. American small business creation is one of the most powerful economic forces in the world. In no other country it's as easy and rewarding to pursue entrepreneurship as here. Americans have an unparalleled privilege to improve our living standards through entrepreneurship, which provides employment opportunities and enormous value to our communities. I've seen the power of small business creation has firsthand. In 1979, when I was 17, my family and I fled the socialist uprising in Nicaragua. Despite the fact my parents had multiple jobs, we were called burgueses, and targeted by the Sandinistas, who nationalized the economy, expropriated private property, introduced price controls, destroyed the currency, and indefinitely detained and executed counter-revolutionaries. Life wasn't easy in the United States. My parents had to work graveyard shifts and often could not afford groceries. But these sacrifices were small compared to the chance to live in a free country. I was able to fulfill my parents' dream of going to college and then started a popular Cuban restaurant with my husband that has 18 employees. Americans should never take their entrepreneurial birthrights for granted. In some countries, entrepreneurship is illegal. In many others, starting a business is burdensome, convoluted, and bureaucratic. That is the most impossible to do. The opportunity to start and grow your own small business is a precious gift. Unfortunately, small business ownership is becoming more and more difficult. I fear that I would not have been able to start my own business if I were beginning today. One of the biggest problems American small businesses faces right now is high inflation. It must be addressed in order to turbocharge small business creations and growth. Officially, American businesses are approximately 10% inflation in their inputs. But in my restaurant experience, our supplies costs are rising even faster. For instance, a box of lime that I used to be able to find for $30 now costs me $90. I have been forced to raise price just to stay profitable, alienating my loyal customers on a fixed income who do not understand my predicament. The highest consumer inflation in 40 years, including record high gas prices, are also hurting American businesses by making their customers feel poorer. When it costs $75 to fill up your gas tank, you're less likely to make discretionary purchases like eating out, hurting small businesses nationwide. In my view, these hurdles can be overcome by the federal government doing less, not more. Trillions of dollars in unnecessary federal deficit spending over the last couple of years have devaluated the dollar and fueled inflation. Extremely generous federal supplemental unemployment insurance and stimulus payments pay people to stay out of the workforce and have contributed to the current historic labor shortage. Bans on oil production on federal lands and bans on new pipelines raise the price of gasoline, which is an input in almost every good in the economy, putting upward pressure on prices. New and expanded small business can increase the supply of goods and commodities, reversing runaway inflation that is causing so much pain for ordinary Americans. If only policymakers will let us do so by getting out of the way. When I see today unchecked inflation, I'm reminded of my former life in Nicaragua. For a small business and an American economy to remain beacon of the world, this inflation must immediately be brought under control. On behalf of the American small business, I urge you to please consider how your policy often hurts small businesses, reduce economic competitiveness, and fuel inflation. Doing so can protect the unique American small business economy for the next generation of entrepreneurs. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rubio. I now recognize myself for questions, and then we will move on to the ranking member and other members. I'm a little disappointed in the hearing today. I've worked very hard as chairman to keep this committee focused on real structural issues, and we're hearing lots about inflation and government spending, and we're going to spend a minute or two on that because I think it's pretty important that we be anchored in some semblance of reality here. So let's spend a second on inflation. Inflation, and Dr. Theodos, I'm going to borrow your PhD here because I'm not a PhD, but inflation is when a basket of goods goes up in price, correctly? Who raises the prices on those basket of goods?
Suppliers and businesses.
Suppliers. So suppliers, say that again and a little more loudly.
Suppliers and businesses.
Right, so a basket of goods, inflation by definition is when businesses are raising the costs of the products that they produce, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now we get to the source of this inflation, and let me be very clear. Inflation is a problem for consumers and for businesses. No question about it. I've just never heard it as a structural challenge to businesses. So let's talk about where this inflation comes from. Again, Dr. Theodos, I'll borrow your PhD. My understanding is that there's been roughly $5 trillion of fiscal spending associated with the economic meltdown attributable to COVID. $5 trillion. First of all, will it surprise anybody in this room, because we're being held accountable for this, to hear that a full $3 trillion of that spending was done under the Trump administration and $1.9 trillion was done under the Biden administration? Does that sound about right to the witnesses? Right, okay. So we do a big fiscal stimulus. Dr. Theodos, what does that do to growth? And how does growth in this country, because we actually did more fiscal stimulus in the United States than the United Kingdom did, that Germany did, that Japan did. How is our economic growth rate comparing to the United Kingdom, to Germany, and to Japan right now?
We're doing well.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
We're doing well.
We're actually doing better than all three of those countries, right? And let me ask the witnesses, when our economy is growing, when unemployment is at 3.8%, is that good for small businesses or bad for small businesses? Somebody answer my question. It's good for small businesses. Ms. Rubio, thank you for being here. I think I've actually been to your restaurant, and I've spent time in Nicaragua. I have a really visceral understanding of what your family went through, and thank you for being here. It did catch my attention, though, that you said your recommendation to us is that the government do less, not more. Ms. Rubio, let me read something from an article I read. My restaurant has been able to stay open thanks to the Paycheck Protection Program. The PPP is a lifeline to businesses with 500 or fewer employees, providing forgivable loans for critical businesses. Do you recognize those words? Yeah, where are they from?
Well, I recognize them because we were helped by the Payroll Protection Program.
Your restaurant received a Paycheck Protection Program.
Yes.
And did it allow your restaurant to stay open?
It did help us, yes.
Right. And so help me understand the Paycheck Protection Program. Again, we're going to hear about inflation and about out-of-control government spending. The Paycheck Protection Program, along with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the Restaurant Revitalization Program. Did you by chance get a restaurant revitalization?
No, we
okay.
didn't.
All in was about $1 trillion in spending. The PPP program, which many of my Republican colleagues voted for and continue to tout as a success, was more than 10% of the overall spending. So maybe you can help me understand, what is unnecessary spending?
Well, we didn't apply for anything else because we felt that we already had the help. So when it's a continuous help to small businesses or to the community, it becomes a way of living. So you're not independent anymore. You depend on what you're being given by the government, rather than what you produce.
I thank you, and I'm really glad you're here because I think you exemplify what most of us want, which is we want the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that you've demonstrated in your successful restaurant, but when times are tough, we want you to get a little bit of help, the way you did with a Paycheck Protection Program loan. So I want to move on from inflation and ask a question that I think is about the real structural barriers that attend to small business formation. I haven't heard enough, because I think it's so critical, about access to capital. Now, obviously, the Paycheck Protection Program is access to capital, but let's get away from the world of the SBA. What could the private sector do to be more efficient in the provision of capital to startup businesses? And I'm talking about restaurants and car washes. I'm not talking about the venture capital industry. So I don't have a lot of time yet, but I'll just open this up to the witnesses. What could the private sector do to be more efficient in the provision of capital? Mr. Sands, looks like you're on the mic there.
Yeah, so I think the private sector will naturally gravitate towards programs or opportunities in which they're able to deploy capital at scalable amounts. And so some of the recommendations that you hear both the committee and myself making towards CDFIs are guiding them in that private capital into responsible lending based on what I would call carrots that you have at your disposal. For example, licensing, structure, and different programs that are at your disposal. So I think it's important that as we look at the private industry, we guide them not towards responsible capital, which obviously it's been in predatory lending, and we guide it more towards responsible lending, which will help the businesses like Mrs. Rubio, Mrs. Russell here today.
Ms. Russell, you've got some experience here.
Definitely, I agree wholeheartedly. Responsible lending is essential. I have heard from so many business owners who fell into that trap of predatory lending, where they were in trouble for years trying to dig their business out and taking over their personal finances, and then, it becomes just this continuous downfall for them. But understanding responsible lending, and then also for them having that financial literacy education to know not to go into that type of product is essential.
Thank you. Yield back my time, recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to avoid getting fully in the debate of government spending, but I do think, out of the gates, I think it's worth a short conversation on it. Mr. Theodos, you noted economic growth in the United States stronger than the Eurozone right now. We'll go pre-Russia invasion for sake of not getting into a global geopolitical discussion on economic growth. That's true. Is the inflation rate in the Eurozone significantly different than the United States?
I don't know.
Yes or no?
I don't have those numbers.
I will offer to you it is significantly different than it is in the United States, that at a point in time when, for the past 15 years or so, inflation tracked between the Eurozone and the United States pretty closely, and then there's been a huge divergence, and that divergence is driven by the fact that the United States continues to refuse to rip the Band-Aid off the COVID-era policies. So I wouldn't offer that the Republicans here are going to argue against the spending that was necessary early on when we had government-enforced shutdowns. We had government-enforced shutdowns. Government had to react in programs such as PPP. Not a perfect program, but overall worked reasonably well. Then what we've seen is instead of ripping the Band-Aid off of COVID-era policies and getting our life back to normal, we've continued with significantly increased spending in Washington, D.C. We saw $1.9 trillion just about a year ago. Then we saw another trillion plus into an infrastructure bill that is heavily dependent on additional debt. And I think it does drive the inflation. That's a minute 30. Let's keep rolling here. But Ms. Rubio, what is the number one issue facing your small business right now?
First is labor shortage and high prices.
And so let's break both of these down, because I think they're both really important. One is the labor side. How do we get workers back to work? We're seeing a low participation rate. It's improving as we've removed some of the COVID-era policies that we've seen. We're still not back to where we need to be. Inflation on the other side. You referenced limes increasing. Have you seen other price increases from your suppliers?
Definitely. The meat products that I used to pay $7 a pound for my churrasco steak, now it has gone up to $12 a pound.
And at your restaurant, a meal, lunchtime, dinner time would cost what? Rough math for a meal, 10 to 20?
$11 for lunch and possibly $16, $18 for dinner.
So accessible, affordable food for a
Correct.
family or
Yes, it's
a
a
worker
family
to sit
restaurant.
down. And what have you had to do in your menu as it relates to these increasing costs that are inbound to you? Have you had to adjust that?
Yes, sometimes maybe we have taken some of the menus, some of the items out because we're not able to have it for profit. At the contrary, it will cost us more. Also substituting, like the box of limes that I said, we normally do limes for mojitos, and now we're doing lemons. They don't taste the same, but we had to do substitution in order to.
Yes, it's a big challenge. And how do your customers react? Are they
Some of them complain about the taste, but it's not the same, and they just go along with it. We just have to.
Because we know we're in uncertain times. Let's go back on the labor side. Another big issue that faces a lot of our small businesses. I understand your restaurant's been short-staffed, and I think you were hesitant to come here today because you had to step away from the restaurant for a full day. How many employees would you have in an ideal situation, if you could, if the labor market was there?
If it's Friday or Saturday night, I will have maybe 20, 22. I haven't been able to hire a bartender, which we were able to create an area for a bar, and we haven't been able to because we don't have anybody that is interested in the job. And then when we do find somebody to come and train, either they don't like it or they don't feel that they're making enough money, and I cannot compete with a chain company or anybody like that to pay what they would like to make.
And I understand. How has that changed from before the pandemic to now?
Well, it has changed drastically. I mean, a lot of people that were working for me before, or with me because I work at the same pace that they do, we had to, everybody has their own responsibilities. Nowadays, they never came back to work. They really don't know what they're doing up to now. And even if I do hire people, I see the people that we do hire, whoever shows up, and 2 or 3 weeks later into the training, they do not want to come back to work.
So challenging labor.
It has been challenging in that respect, trying to keep the staff as well.
Understood. In the 30 seconds left that I'll take, the licensing environment, do you have a number of hurdles that you have to jump through as you were opening a restaurant and maintaining your restaurant?
Yes, we did. We've been in business for a long time, so it's so far, we're now being established, so we haven't experienced a lot of that in the latest.
But during the entrepreneurial phase, there was a number.
Yes, we did.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here today. I think you tell a story that many of the small businesses across this country are facing right now in uncertain times. And I think it shows the importance of really getting our way of life back, ripping off the Band-Aid off of a lot of these COVID-era policies. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, the gentlewoman from New York, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Himes, for this incredibly important hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, sharing your expertise. We hear almost every day here that small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and thankfully there is broad bipartisan support for small businesses in the United States, but oftentimes we see that we don't treat all small businesses equally, depending on who starts them or what kind of business you are. You don't often get access to, you don't get access to policies, you don't get access to capital, and sometimes you're just not even treated favorably, whether it's by your municipal government or your federal government. I want to dive into a little bit what kinds of small businesses often don't get as recognized or invested in, because there's a whole journey before you get to brick and mortar. And I represent an area, Jackson Heights, which is one of the most heavily immigrant areas in the world. Over 200 languages are spoken in a very small area. And it is a place where immigrants often start businesses on the street through street vendors. And we saw during the administration of the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, that there were some complications in the rollout and recognition of street vendors. Dr. Theodos, I want to start by setting the scene with you. Would street vendors count as a small business under the definition set by the SBA?
They have fewer than 500 employees, so that would be small, yes.
Thank you, yes. Advocates estimate that up to 20,000 New Yorkers alone, the vast majority of them immigrants, make their living selling food or merchandise on the city streets. And in the United States overall, we're talking about more than 56,000 street vendors working across the country. Not only that, but when you also pair the fact that, according to the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, 1 in 4 small businesses in the United States are Latino-owned, and 75% of all new businesses in the United States are being started by Latinos. Latinas in particular are driving an enormous amount of this growth, with over 2 million Latina-owned businesses in the United States, a growth of more than 87% since 2007, and many of them are street vendors. Can you tell us a little bit, Dr. Theodos, about what kinds of policing and regulations that street vendors may be subject to, both in New York City or across the country?
Sure. Under the law, street vendors have to be licensed. That can be a long process. You often need a proof of residency, a photo ID, a sales tax ID number. You need to pay a few $100s to get a license fee, as well as in some environments in New York, you have to register if you're a food business with Department of Health, mental hygiene. So New York City in particular caps its street vendors at 2,900, now up to 4,000. And it's worth remembering this can be dangerous and very difficult work.
Thank you. Many folks think that street vendors are kind of this unofficial, informal business, but it's actually extraordinarily regulated and documented, particularly on the municipal level. And they pay taxes, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, so if street vendors are small businesses that pay taxes, and they have to follow an enormous amount of regulatory requirements on the municipal level, why is it that we're seeing and that we saw an enormous amount of them rejected for paycheck protection programs? Mr. Rogers, I want to turn to you. And thank you for being here, for representing the SBA Council on Underserved Communities. I want to delve into some of those reasons with you. My understanding is that the SBA requires business utility bills and leases, as well as a business bank account and payroll records for access to PPP funds. Street vendors often can't meet all of these requirements, especially those requiring business utility bills and leases, given the nature of their business. Does the SBA currently have any procedure for street vendors to ask for an exception to these requirements?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm here in my personal capacity, not as the chairman of the SBA's Council on Underserved Communities, but I do know that Administrator Guzman is really very committed to the types of businesses that you've described and discussed this morning.
Am I right to understand that while neither the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL explicitly require a specific immigration status in their applications, immigration status does seem to impact whether an application gets approved or not?
That'll be one of the things that we will be studying as we have our meetings over the next 2 years. So we will have hearings and opportunities for different leadership groups to be able to come and talk with us about concerns and things that need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. Chairman Himes, I'd like to submit 2 documents to the record, one being an SBA application denial from a local immigrant small business owner, as well as a study on the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on the informal economy.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Davidson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses, and Mr. Rubio, thanks for recognizing the importance of inflation. People might back home not follow all the words of inflation, but they do know that prices are going up. And I think they're especially vulnerable to the logical fallacy that my colleague willfully perpetrated here, that somehow it's your fault that you raise prices, or your supplier of steak's fault that they raise prices, when the reality is that the value of money has been undermined by the fact that Congress spent more money than we could collect in taxes. We spent more money than anybody would lend us, and we spent it by printing it. We created it. Poof. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet is now over $9 trillion. That has destroyed the spending power of our dollars. And so it resulted in asset price inflation for a while. The value of things that, like land, has gone up. We've seen real estate go up by 20–25%. Eventually that shows up in the cost to lease a property or have access to it. But it also goes up in the goods that people demand, commodity prices for food and grain. And there are other things that are causing it, not just our actions. I mean, frankly, we spent the money, and in a broad bipartisan way spent the money, because we were responding to a crisis. Lots of us opposed spending $1.9 trillion, under the American Rescue Plan, because we realized you were already spending more money. You had to substitute the spending. So when you look at the inflation, GDP, didn't go up by nearly $7 trillion, right? We spent nearly $7 trillion. So if it was a necessary prop for GDP, which it was, then it would have gone up 1 for 1 if we got it perfectly right. But it didn't. Where did the rest of it go? It inflated things. And so you've had people who had to raise their prices to you, and for you to stay in business, you had to raise your prices to consumers. And for consumers to get by, they have to pay the higher prices. And unfortunately, you are being told that the answer is more government and less freedom. That the solution is somehow that we spend more money, that we go deeper in debt, and we subsidize more, which will raise the costs more. The reality is more spending raises prices, it doesn't lower them. So is it a necessary thing in a time? Absolutely. I do agree that the payroll protection plan provided an important bridge when literally in some places you weren't even able to operate your business, even if you wanted to. So we had a lot of government risk. But the government risk that we've got generally is too much government. What the solution is, I think you're onto, is more freedom and less government. And we have to have sound money. We can't debase the money, because that is the infrastructure that our economy depends on, is the value of the U.S. dollar. We're seeing that undermined by all kinds of policies. And the challenge that you dealt with really is the other piece that people are dealing with. We had all this money flowing in. The definition is too many dollars chasing too few goods. So we have been constrained on goods because it's harder to produce. And it's especially harder to produce, as you highlight, when you can't get people to show up to work. And it's weird how when you pay people not to work, they work less. So some of those policies have finally been turned off, but we haven't focused on why aren't more people back in the workforce? With all this spending and everything else, and now the economy back open, not closed artificially most everywhere by government policies, why aren't more people working? It's true that the unemployment rate's low, but we have millions fewer people in the workforce today than we had prior to COVID. And we aren't spending time talking about that. Businesses like yours employ 2/3 of the new workers. And so thank you for working to create jobs. Thank you for weathering the storm and all the burden that you've all had to go through to do this. I am glad that we had such bipartisan support for some of the spending, but I feel sad that there isn't a plan to do this in a way that preserves sound money. There isn't a plan to access anything other than debt, and the banks are being told, because interest rates are low, not to make certain loans. They're being driven to not make loans by policy, because rationally, when capital's inexpensive, people would take it. And lastly, Ms. Russell, when you highlighted the importance of equity financing, people providing equity into the business, that's made almost impossible by government, accredited investor rules that protect people from themselves. Often founders have the ideas, they literally write the code, and the people that help them do it can't even get an equity stake in the business because they're not already wealthy. So too much government protects deal flow for a donor base instead of democratic access to capital. So I really hope we assess the accredited investor rule, and I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Gonzalez, who I understand is remote, is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Gonzalez, do we have an indication he's with us? You may need to unmute, Mr. Gonzalez. Okay, we may have lost Mr. Gonzalez. Why don't I'm going to go to Ms. Bice. We'll come back to Mr. Gonzalez if he rejoins us. Ms. Bice, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. First, we talked a lot or heard a lot from you in regards to lending and the challenges that you have seen, particularly with small businesses. There was a growth rate in 2020 of small business lending. Anyone want to take a guess what that growth rate was? 14% in 2020 of increased growth rate. In addition, based on stats here, there was a conversation earlier around the denial of loan applications for small businesses. Anyone want to take a guess on what the percentage of approved loans from institutions were in 2019? 65%. While I recognize that, yes, there will be certain individuals, businesses that may not have access to capital as easily. Maybe it's because the balance sheet of the business doesn't provide some sort of financial certainty to the lending institution or the SBA that's actually going to receive its investment back. But these are pretty significant numbers that we're seeing small businesses receiving from these institutions. Any thoughts on that?
Actually, I do have thoughts on that in terms of, when you're talking about looking at a balance sheet or looking at the financials of the business. When I mentioned earlier I was turned down for our first loan, we had a mortgage at that bank. So there was equity on the home that I already had with that bank. So for that bank to reject my business loan for really no other reason than to look at me and say no, we have to admit that there are inherent biases in the way that lending is occurring in this country.
Could you have taken out a HELOC or some other loan against the equity in the home to be able to utilize that capital for your business?
Sure, but it was my business and that was my home. And one of the things that we have been taught, right, is that we keep those things separate, so that when we're looking at my business and my personal finances, we keep those separate. And there was no reason for that bank to deny me because we had literally just closed a $10 million deal. Hadn't started it yet. We wanted the capital to start it, right? We had just closed that $10 million deal and we were excited, and we just wanted $25,000 to get us through that first month or so. And that large bank said no. And it was based purely on a woman and a woman of color.
Mr. Sands.
Congresswoman Bice, I appreciate your comments. One of the things as we talk about inflation, and I'm no monetary expert, but I will tell you.
That makes two of us, sir.
I will tell you in the last 2 decades, and what it appears the solution is to contract money out of the system. And so the counter to that is that contraction also means less money to lend. So while there might be increased prices in our businesses and our suppliers, we also need to think about what this means to Mrs. Rubio and Ms. Russell. They will have less money to borrow as well. And so there's a balancing act there. And one of the recommendations that we're trying to make is if the intake of small businesses has now leaned towards mission-based lenders, whether it be for the street vendors that Ms. Cortez mentioned, Congresswoman Cortez mentioned, or any of the businesses here, these mission-based lenders and CDFIs don't have the leveraging power that the banks have. And so what that means is we're going to have all these customers who need access to capital. Money is going to be contracting. And if we don't get that same leverage from Federal Reserve, Federal Home Loan Bank, and others, we're not going to be able to do the same. Just to make it plain, $100,000 today equals a $100,000 loan. If we had that leverage, $20,000 would equal a $100,000 loan. So while we're trying to think about inflation, we're trying to think about all this cure, if we don't solve the other side of the coin, we're going to have some real serious issues with access to capital for these underserved businesses.
So speaking of access to capital, here's another, I think, avenue that we haven't really talked about at all here this morning, and that is either venture capital or angel investors. You know, what are your thoughts on utilizing those resources for these startup small businesses like Ms. Russell?
There's considerable promise to those models. They are highly concentrated in a very few industries and a very few places. And so we have a few programs that we can bolster to try to diversify access to these resources. It's still going to be a smaller slice of businesses that really can ever have the return profile and trajectory to make sense in those models, but there are those businesses that can make sense.
What do you think that we should be doing to grow and increase the number of angel and VCs that are participating with these, what I would consider micro businesses or smaller businesses that are looking to get off the ground?
We have some successful programs. The EDA's Build to Scale program is actually growing an ecosystem. You need the human capital, you need the talent, you need the investor interest. We need to reform and retool the SBIC program, so it could be a real part of a solution set here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I do not know what the time is, so I will kindly yield back.
I apologize, Ms. Bice. Yeah, we had a clock problem there, but you were just over 5 minutes. I thank you for that. And I understand that Mr. Gonzalez may be back with us. If so, Mr. Gonzalez, you're recognized for 5 minutes. And let's please run the clock this time.
Thank you so much. Yep. Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists for such an important presentation today. As you know, a significant amount of COVID relief to date has been moved through the Small Business Administration, the Economic Impact Disaster Loans and Paycheck Protection Programs, the Restaurant Relief Fund, and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grants that have all been fundamental tools for small businesses to survive during this pandemic. Mr. Theodos, as you and other witnesses have stated in your testimony, there's been a small business boom over the last 2 years. You stated this is due in part to unprecedented federal stimulus. What are some of the key takeaways, and how can we support the continued success of small businesses as we move out of the pandemic?
Thank you. We need principally to do two things. We need to provide and facilitate the provision of more affordable access to capital using tools we have already and creating new ones through the Treasury Department, through the SBA, through USDA, through Commerce. And we need to bolster technical assistance. We need it to be higher quality. We need it to be accessible in hours and timing that makes sense for business owners to use at their own pacing. And we need it to be highly skilled with accountants and tax experts who really can provide the support that businesses need.
Yeah, thank you. And I can't agree more with this, the being more technologically advanced. I was disappointed to see the unequal dispersal of COVID relief in my overwhelmingly Hispanic district, which is about 80 to 90% Hispanic. Less than 25% of businesses that received Paycheck Protection Program funds self-reported as Hispanic owned. Ms. Russell, what can we do at the federal level to make sure that underserved business communities like those in my district in South Texas can adequately participate in and have access to these tools and resources? What have we learned in these last two go-arounds that can be improved moving forward?
Thank you so much for that question. It goes right back to the technical assistance programs and getting out in that community and being able to serve them and talk about the importance of having a relationship with a bank as you're starting your business. I think so many of us start our businesses from our hearts and we're just ready to go out there and get it done, and we're not realizing or thinking of some of the things that might come to oppose us as we're moving along. And the technical assistance that I received, I know, helped me to understand what the needs were. Start your relationship with your bank early. Get in there and understand how you work with the bank so that when these situations are coming, you are prepared and you're better able to handle the challenges that come with your business.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Donalds is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I got to tell you, Congress is a funny place. We like scheduling all our hearings at 10 o'clock. I don't know why.
Yeah.
You know, we have many hours in the day, but Congress likes 10 a.m. Okay. Real quick, I just want to kind of get a quick recap of some of the stuff I missed coming in late, and I do apologize. I thank you all for taking your time to be here. You got it? You good? All right, cool. It's all right, you know, trying to make sure things are right. So real quick, Dr. Theodos, Ms. Russell, what are your recommendations with respect to small businesses in the United States, small business lending in particular, and access to capital? If you can summarize it briefly, I don't have the clock in front of me, so.
Definitely. I think we're on the same page in terms of looking at really good banking and understanding how to get responsible lending out to the small businesses and understanding the levels of programs that are there. The predatory lending programs, we have to have the regulations around them so that they go away, quite frankly.
Quick question. So what would you define as predatory lending?
Some folks look at the word factoring as a great, wonderful thing, but factoring when you are in not in a great place with your organization, it can take you out, right? It's a method of funding that looks at your receivables, and they will lend you based on your receivables, but then they're adding a percentage to that. And some businesses use that well because they're getting a low percentage on that, and some businesses don't understand that and use it really poorly, right, because they're getting 20%. So for every dollar, you're paying that factoring agency 20%. So if you're paying them 20%,
right,
you can see how that math works, yeah.
Specifically about factoring, and I'm aware of the process. I actually looked at a factoring proposal when I was helping a nonprofit to start up. Is the issue the actual process of factoring, or is it, and I'm gonna use your words from the previous line of questioning, the technical assistance or the actual know-how of how factoring works and the intimate knowledge of a business owner with their capability to grow their business while actually having to repay the money that they borrowed?
Exactly. I think we would all agree that when you're starting a business, you're starting it because you love the thing that you're doing. A hairstylist, as you were mentioning earlier, doesn't start the business because she wants to do accounting. She starts the business because she loves styling hair. And so as she's learning to develop that infrastructure for herself, the technical assistance becomes very important. I might need a loan. How does that work? If I don't understand all of the products that are available, I am going to become prey to factoring because as soon as I establish my company, they're setting up to come in and contact me.
All right, I gotta because I'm wondering now. I saw it over in the corner. Real quick, Mr. Theodos, summarize. Dr. Theodos, my apologies. Summarize for me what your recommendations are.
Fundamentally, if we want to shift the dynamics in this country, we can't do it in an entirely subsidy-neutral way. So there are strategies and approaches to work on the margins. But fundamentally, we subsidize affordable housing in this country. We have very few and limited subsidies attached to growing businesses in the U.S.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of my background. My colleagues know I was a community banker for 5.5 years. I got started in the credit department. I've written loans, anything from a mom and pop small business up to planned unit developments in Southwest Florida. I've worked in insurance. I've worked in financial services. I'm securities licensed 7 and 66. I do understand what both of you are saying with respect to access to capital, the need for just know-how of how to actually run and manage a business versus starting one and owning one. One of the things when I was in the Florida legislature that I supported very vehemently was actual courses in financial literacy for juniors in high school before they graduate. Because when you go into the real world, if you don't understand what it is to actually understand credit, manage credit, borrow money effectively, and know what the repayments are, you're going to run into significant problems, especially if you're trying to start a small business. Dr. Theodos, I think where you and I are going to disagree is when it comes to subsidies. I'm well aware of the affordable housing subsidies. I would also argue that on a macro level, the affordable housing subsidies don't have their intended effect. On a macro level, they might help individually certain people acquire homes. On a macro level, what we've seen is actually led to increased costs in housing overall because there is a backdoor subsidy coming from the federal government or from state governments. When it comes to banking in the United States, and this has been my soapbox. I know, Mr. Chairman, I'm running over. If I may have some indulgence, I'm wrapping here. My pet peeve here in Washington, frankly, has been Dodd-Frank regulation out of 2009. It systematically dismantled community banking in the United States. without question. Community banking has been eviscerated in our country because of Dodd-Frank. We were told that it was going to stop the big banks from being the scourge to our economy. What it has done is made the big banks bigger, and the community banks are no longer, can't even operate under the weight of the regulatory environment in the United States. What we should be doing in Congress to help small businesses is reverse course in banking regulation, so you can still have CDFIs. Fintechs are trying to fill that space with respect to small business lending, but you have to have a robust community banking environment so Ms. Russell and Ms. Rubio can have the relationships necessary to grow their small businesses in an effective, market-driven way without you guys coming here asking us to change rules every Congress. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jacobs is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Ms. Russell, I want to start with you. As you mentioned in your testimony, child care is important to small businesses. It's also the case that many child care providers are small business owners themselves. So can you elaborate on the need for investments in child care for small business owners, including child care providers, and how the federal government can support them?
Sure. When we think about childcare, obviously it is a business, right? It is someone bringing their child in so that they can be properly cared for, and it's important for those child care facilities to have the monies necessary for them to survive, but it's also important for the individuals to be able to afford that facility so that they can ensure good care for their children. So one of the solutions to that could easily be a tax credit back to the individuals so that as they're paying for that child care, they are receiving that tax credit.
Thank you. And Dr. Theodos, same question to you.
Childcare is a critical tool to unlocking employees to be able to go to work, and also for business owners who are working. And so there are important policies that we can undertake as a country to facilitate work, both for employees and for entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the programs in the American Rescue Plan. I know they have been well discussed today, but I wanted to talk about a specific piece of it, which is the Community Navigator program that the SBA used to strengthen outreach to underserved businesses so that they could get access to these in the subsequent rounds of PPP, et cetera. So, Dr. Theodos, could you talk, what do we know about the Community Navigator program so far, and in what ways are Community Navigators a promising model for expanding access to small business services and actually other public benefits and services more broadly?
There have been abiding concerns that some of the existing institutional supports to provide technical assistance are not sufficiently community embedded, that are not reaching all peoples and all places. And so we have a promising program that's still early in its implementation, so we'll be watching and we'll be learning how it works. But what's promising is engagement directly into communities and providing that support.
Thank you. Well, we too will be watching closely and hoping that it's a potentially successful model we can be using for other services. I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Theodos. I'm sorry. In your testimony, you noted the success of worker cooperatives. In my district, in El Cajon, we have Taylor Guitars, one of the largest manufacturers of acoustic guitars in the United States. Actually, Ms. Bice and I visited it together when she came to visit, and it's actually 100% worker-owned through an employee stock ownership plan. And so I was wondering if you can comment more broadly on the research related to different forms of worker ownership, such as ESOPs and cooperatives, including the impact on workers' wages and opportunities to build wealth as the business outcomes. And since the research suggests these are promising models, what more can the federal government do to encourage worker ownership models within small businesses?
Co-ops have a long and storied history in the U.S. They helped to bring electricity to parts of this country that didn't have it. They're helping to bring broadband access to parts of this country that didn't have it. They're providing affordable housing. They're providing financial services. And employee-owned businesses are an important part of our ecosystem. Some of our best known and recognized brands are actually employee-owned, though we don't always know that in the background. And research does show that they are capable of generating higher wages, wealth, and also job attachment and security, lowering tenure and providing greater benefits or for opportunities for workers to engage in the financial return, but also in other ways as they attach to businesses. And what policy can do is engage in several ways to help level the playing field around access to existing programs, policies, and services and supports.
Well, thank you, and I think it's something that might be interesting for our committee to look into. I guess with my last remaining 30 seconds, I will just note that a recent survey of over 1,000 business owners by Small Business for America found that 85% of small businesses support guaranteeing affordable childcare for working parents. 66% believe the federal government has a role in supporting universal access to affordable, high-quality childcare, and 55% believe that the lack of affordable, high-quality childcare for employees has a negative impact on their business. So as we're talking about what kinds of government investments are actually helpful to small businesses, I hope that we recognize that childcare is an important part of our economy and supporting our small businesses. Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back. Just-in-time arrival. If you're ready, Ms. Kamek, we'll recognize you for 5 minutes.
Just in time.
The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamek, is recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you for pushing the button for me, Representative Jacobs. Holy smokes. All right, when you're 5'3" and you got little T-Rex arms and legs, you don't move very fast. It's the first time that's ever been said in the congressional record now, I'm sure. But with that, thank you to Chairman and Ranking Member for hosting this hearing today, and thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing and for your patience. Very important topic that we are discussing. Obviously, this is top of mind issue for so many Americans around the country. And of course, our small businesses play a vital role in our national economy for goods, services, most importantly, jobs. Now, I represent Florida's 3rd Congressional District, the Gator Nation. It's a thing up here. But that is located in north central Florida. And according to the small business profile from the SBA, small businesses make up 93.8% of all employers in the district, and half of all employees are of small business, that demographic in my district. So clearly, no doubt that small businesses are essential to the success of our community and many other rural areas like ours around the country. Now, so many of our colleagues, all of us, we meet regularly with owners from our district, and we frequent these businesses. So right now, I'm confident that my colleagues are hearing the same concerns: inflation, trouble finding help, gas prices, supply chain issues, and uncertainties due to government mandates. In short, there are increasing concerns amongst our small business owners. Now, according to the National Federation of Independent Business Research, a survey that was conducted last month on the Optimism Index among small business owners, it had decreased by 1.4 points to 95.7, the second consecutive month below the 48-year average of 98. I'm hearing this repeatedly over and over and over again, and coming from a small business family, 3rd-generation commercial sandblaster, when I talk to my family about if they could start over today and still have success, they say, absolutely not. We would have never been able to survive in today's environment. So we've all been calling attention to this rising inflation for months. Clearly this is a problem because this is the highest level of inflation in over 40 years. I am 34 years old. In my lifetime, I have never seen inflation at this level. I think that speaks volumes, especially to millennials and my peer group who are starting out their careers and building businesses. A few days ago, one person in this administration finally acknowledged the reality of inflation. In an interview on CNBC, Secretary Yellen said, "We are likely to see another year in which 12-month inflation numbers remain uncomfortably high." I think it's past time that members of this administration and our colleagues recognize this reality and put an end to this reckless spending and maintain our competitive tax code, enact regulatory reform to eliminate burdensome regulations for small businesses. For example, I am the champion of the REINS Act, a simple, common sense piece of legislation that would rein in government regulations. For too long, we've had bureaucrats that are unelected and unaccountable for the impact that they have on industry. This bill would change that in bringing these issues over a certain threshold back to Congress. It's clear, and you guys can see on this, every single item on here, gasoline, fuel, natural gas, food, energy commodities, it's all up. Across the board, we're experiencing crises across the board. I just want to end on this before I jump into a quick question for Ms. Rubio. Last week, I met with a small business owner from my district. He is a timber owner, a forestry guy, and he is a staple in our community. He's involved in countless initiatives, gives out of his pocket regularly to all kinds of causes. And when I asked him about the gas prices, he almost cried. The gas prices, the fuel prices, are having such an impact on him and the 15 people that he employs that he is looking at shutting down his operation. Factor in the supply chain crisis that we're experiencing with lumber and raw materials already. This is just one small operator in a small part of North Central Florida, and we're facing this in thousands and thousands of cases around the country. So I think the short of it is it's time to empower our people. It is time to empower our job creators, and let's get government out of the way. So, Ms. Rubio, appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And I just want to touch on labor issues. So before inflation was the hot topic, there was a huge concern dealing with labor. I want to talk to you and get your take on why you think today it is so difficult to find good help.
I think just beginning, like I mentioned before, a lot of my employees that were working for me did not come back. I feel they increase in labor payments, or it's a lot for me to compete with bigger companies. They're paying more. Uber is paying more. Amazon is paying more for the drivers. So they tend to go to those companies. So people to work for me, I don't have anybody interested in coming to work for me. So it's been really, really a challenge. A lot of them are depending on what they're receiving from the government as a supplemental. Yes, we have received in the past help to stay in business for
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
organizations that on certain times that we went through with the COVID. But if that becomes a way of living, depending on the government money that it's given out, that kills creativeness and doesn't let people to become entrepreneurs in life.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Sorry.
I appreciate it, Ms. Rubio.
yep,
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your consideration.
We may, I'm going to give another possible member about 2 minutes, and I'm going to fill that time actually picking up on one of Ms. Kamick's, the direction she was going. I'm going to then give the ranking member equal time. We haven't talked a lot about one aspect of employees who I know good employees are critical to small businesses. Let me just take 2 minutes. Ms. Rubio, Ms. Russell, since you're running small businesses, what could we do better in terms of training and preparing people to work in your businesses? And I don't just mean federal government. I mean, if our public schools should be doing better, if the state should be, just 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute each, what could we be doing better to prepare people to be good employees in your businesses?
I think sometimes when you're looking at going back to when we're speaking of high school, the apprenticeship programs are essential. Not everyone is dedicated to going to college, but when you have great apprenticeship programs beginning in high school, along with the great financial literacy education that you will get in high school, those are essential. In terms of looking at workers not returning to jobs now, I think many people had the opportunity during COVID. As terrible as COVID was, they had the opportunity to upskill. So whereas I may have been working in that restaurant, I've taken a course now because everyone had free courses. I've taken that course, I've upskilled, I've retooled, and so now COVID has ended and I'm able to go out to work and have myself a different opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Russell, Ms. Rubio, any thoughts? Give you a minute to, what could we be doing better to get you good employees?
I agree. I agree with her. In fact, the education should start at high school, trying to let them learn how the outside world works, showing more, getting them into trades perhaps, because college is not for everybody. And also, I totally agree with the financial part of education, that they should know what's coming and they should be responsible to the expenses and the work, how they're going to earn their living.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think I took about 2 minutes, so I'm going to give 2 minutes to the ranking member, and if we don't have additional members at that point, we'll close out the hearing.
I'll be short, but apparently long enough for whatever colleague of yours is, or colleague of ours is arriving. But I think we've had a robust conversation today and appreciate it. We struggle, I think, with a handful of things. One is which we have 11 million open jobs in the country, and so sometimes it's a worker mismatch. It's that the jobs that are available don't match the labor supply that's available, and one of the big challenges for us is matching those up. I don't know that we have a silver bullet to do that. I think we have a lot of ideas and suggestions that we put here. I want to go back, if I can, just to I'll throw it as a jump ball. We talk a lot about the regulatory burdens that are there. Mr. Chairman, you very eloquently always say, right, is if there's a regulatory burden that's not necessary, that's the one we're looking for, not the regulatory burden that is necessary. Is we look, and it's a very state-driven process for a lot of our small businesses. A lot of our small businesses are less federally dependent. Are there areas that we should look at? I'm not going to offer that you're going to nail one on the head that we're going to be able to remove, but is there a specific area that you think we could look at where we could reduce those regulatory burdens, even possibly at the state level? Start with Mr. Sands.
Yeah, so one of the ones that we're looking at, again, is the licensure for CDFIs. Congress effectively has about 1,200 community banks that it could unleash. And if we take a look at what's about to happen when we raise interest rates, for example, when interest rates are risen by the Federal Reserve, it's actually going to eliminate those mission-based lenders from being able to lend in their states.
Thank you.
Because a lot of those states.
Only for time. Did you, Dr. Theodos?
I would encourage us to ask states to reconsider what regulations for licensing are truly needed for health and safety.
I think that's a great comment. I've raised up in mine a hairstylist in Wisconsin, which to get a stylist license is 1,500 hours. It's 9 months of 40 hours a week. I'm not offering that maybe it should be zero. I just think it's something we absolutely need to look at where a lot of young entrepreneurs are looking for an area where they can own and operate a business. That's an easy one I think about. Appreciate your comment, Dr. Theodos. I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to the ranking member. Let's see, I think we may have one more member. Ms. Jayapal, are you with us remotely? If so, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Jayapal? Going once? Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh. Ms. Jayapal, are you there?
I am.
Excellent, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Trying to juggle 5 hearings and a press conference today. Very much appreciate this, this panel and want to say that small businesses obviously are foundational to our economy, but as we've heard from so many of our witnesses today, there are many barriers, and our financial institutions have requirements that cut a lot of small businesses completely out, or they have incentives to service only the largest businesses that will give them the biggest profits. And that's why years ago, when I ran a loan fund that was geared towards small businesses with public health projects, we didn't require collateral. We had extensive technical assistance, which I heard mentioned today from the witnesses. We cut down the bureaucratic application process, and we had a specific outreach strategy to reach the right kinds of businesses. And guess what? We had a 99% repayment rate, even with all of that. As Ms. Russell pointed out, COVID actually highlighted the many ways in which our existing institutions largely fail too many small businesses, as we struggle to find ways to easily and efficiently get aid to small businesses and simply exacerbated inequality. For example, in the first year of PPP, $370 billion went to the top 20% of household income groups versus just $13 billion to the bottom 20%. So not only should we take from this that we need to find ways that relief is distributed equitably in these big crises, but also that in our regular day-to-day work, the institutions we have as they are structured are still insufficiently focused on small businesses. So Ms. Russell, I wanted to dive in a little bit more on this, the challenges that underserved and very unique, very small businesses had in getting the PPP, because I think it goes to the larger questions that we're talking about as to how and how we can better support small businesses. Could you speak to that question?
Sure, definitely. I think a lot of it comes down to that understanding and knowing what to do, where to look, and the daunting completion of all of the paperwork. We know that the federal government is capable of being that lifeline when we are in a catastrophic event. So then we roll out this program where the rules changed multiple times. And so as a small business, how do you know how to apply the rules correctly for your business to be able to get the loan? And then where do you go? Because if you don't have that established relationship with the bank, you were not going to be able to maximize a PPP loan.
Thank you. And Mr. Sands, just sticking with this for a second, a study concluded that Black small businesses were 70% more likely to get PPP loans through online lenders because their automated systems minimize racial biases that they would otherwise face. In California, relief Lendistry dispersed were not loans like PPP, but it did rely on similar systems to disperse funds. How did Lendistry's approach for administering California's relief program help connect relief with underserved businesses and in general?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. We focused on having a seamless user experience. So no matter whether they were rural small business or urban small business, they had an opportunity to, one, build rapport with our partners, with us, and also with fellow business owners to all go through the same process. Also, as you alluded to, technology can create a non-biased approach to lending. So not only is it available 24/7 when the business owner is actually available late at night or on weekends or off business hours, it also provides for somewhat of a scalable process and a process where there's equitability in terms of the disbursement of funds.
Thank you. And Ms. Russell, back to you. I think you mentioned the not having a bank relationship. I had a bill. I know the chairman knows it's my passion here, but my Paycheck Recovery Act would have delivered grants in this crisis through the Treasury Department as an example of how the federal government can reach small businesses quickly in this manner. Would that have helped if the federal government used existing tax returns instead of new paperwork to essentially deliver that relief directly?
Absolutely, 100%. The more you can reduce the requirement of a different and additional paperwork to a small business, the more you're going to be able to guide that small business to success.
Thank you so much. I hope that we can get this kind of a program in place before the next crisis and maybe even learn something about what works. I mean, generally, what works during a crisis is also going to work when we're not in a crisis. So I appreciate this panel, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back, and I think that may be it for our members. So I'd like to, very, very quickly, the topic of labor force participation has come up, so I'm going to seek unanimous consent. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy report to the Congress was submitted in February. They've got a treatment of labor force participation, which, barring objection, I will submit for the record. And so ordered. I'd like to really thank our witnesses for their testimony today and really a good, robust conversation. This is a terribly important topic to the committee, so we're grateful for you being here. Without objection, all members will have 10 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 10 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I remind members that written questions and materials for the record should be submitted to the email address provided to your offices. With that, this hearing is adjourned.